we scan this.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
She's here.
I welcome you to this morning's plenary. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's evening show, didn't gamble too much, didn't lose too much money, and you are ready to listen now about large financing initiatives and large research initiatives. Now, seriously, my name is Christoph Richter. I am project manager at the Solar Research Institute and the executive secretary of Solar Paces, and I'm chairing this session this morning, which deals with large global CSP initiatives. And in the overall theme of the conference on cost reduction, we know that cost reductions are achieved through a combination of learning from deployment opportunities as well as from technology development through research and innovation. This plenary feature talks addressing both these aspects. Global deployment opportunities are highlighted in the first talk from an international project financing viewpoint, which is followed by presentations on the strategic R&D initiatives in CSP from different regions of the world. And our first speaker in this session will be Mr. Dana R. Younger. He is Chief Renewable Energy Specialist of the International Finance Corporation, working in the Power and Renewables team in IFC's Global Infrastructure Natural Resources Department. IFC is the private sector lending arm of the World Bank Group, based in Washington, D.C., and has committed already $18.3 billion in financing during the fiscal year 2013. He has been involved in wind and solar energy projects for more than 25 years. Recently, he helped mobilize financing for 2 concentrating solar power projects in South Africa, totaling 150 megawatt, as well as being involved in other CSP projects still being considered for financing in IFC's investment pipeline. Mr. Younger also acts as lead business developer for large grid-tied renewable energy transactions, with a special emphasis on wind energy, solar PV, CSP, and concentrating PV. He served for over 10 years as IFC's executive coordinator for the Global Environment Facility. He has authored several articles regarding renewable energy financing in Euromoney's International Power and Utilities Finance Review, and is an acknowledged international expert on renewable energy who speaks frequently at international wind, solar, geothermal, and renewables conferences, and is quoted regularly in trade publications and the mainstream press. Dana, thank you very much for being with us here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to be with you this morning and to once again be part of the CSP community. I move frequently between the different renewable energy technologies, and CSP is certainly a very exciting and promising field. I have a lot of material to try to cover today, so I'll move quickly through these slides, but I know the organizers are making them available to you, so I hope that you'll have time to study them in greater detail at your leisure. I want to start with an overview of who IFC is and who the World Bank is, because we find that many people, even though you may have read or heard about the bank group, may not be as familiar with the details of how we operate and who we really are. IFC is the private sector lending arm of the World Bank Group. There are really 4 principal organizations that constitute the World Bank Group, and one of those is the World Bank, which is also known as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Then there's something called IDA, which is the International Development Association, which is really the soft loan window, really nothing more than a trust fund bank account where money is provided to the poorest countries of the world. And then you have MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which is the political risk insurance arm, and then IFC, which I'm going to talk about. The main change in IFC in the last decade is that we've increasingly moved our operations to the field. So we're highly decentralized. Over half of our staff are in offices around the world, even though our headquarters are in Washington, D.C., which brings us very close to our clients and the financing needs that they have in the countries in which we operate. We have 3 main business lines. The first is our general investment activities, where we provide long-term debt, corporate financing, and make equity investments. We also have a very large and growing advisory program, and actually some of that advisory work has already occurred with respect to some CSP projects in North Africa. And the newest part of IFC is something we call the Asset Management Company, which is a facility through which we manage money coming from sovereign wealth funds from among our shareholders who want to participate in the equity returns that we receive from the projects in which we invest. So why do we care about power? Most of you are familiar with sort of the energy problematique in emerging market countries, that there's still, depending on the statistics, somewhere between 1 and 3 and 1.7 billion people on the planet without access to modern energy services. Over half a billion people in Africa, and close to half a billion in India and elsewhere in South Asia. And we are, over the last 50 years, become one of the leading, if not the leading, financier of power sector projects in emerging market countries in which we operate. So we've financed more than 30 gigawatts of power generation projects. We're also involved in transmission and distribution financing. Why renewables? I don't think I need to talk very much to this audience about that. Clearly, there are important environmental benefits ranging from climate to reduction of conventional pollutants. And we've made this a principal pillar of our business now, the investment in renewable energy. And last year we committed about $1.5 billion for renewable energy and other clean energy projects, including energy efficiency, and we're committed to increase this to $3 billion a year within the next 3 fiscal years. This chart basically shows the ramping up of our renewable energy investments over the last 5 to 7 years. This continues. Last year we did, in the power sector, roughly $800 million of investments, of which about $600 million was renewable energy projects, 25 separate transactions, including the 2 CSP projects that were mentioned in the introduction. You'll see that we're working with many of the largest utility companies in the world. About half of our business is with global clients, and then we also do a lot of work with local clients around the world, including startups where it's appropriate. And we have quite a bit of value added in power transactions, ranging across from country risk mitigation, structuring of deals to cope with specific kinds of technical or other kinds of risk parameters. We have, as I say, deep experience in the sectors in which we invest, including now CSP, drawing on some of the leading engineering firms in the world with the expertise in these technologies. In terms of our basic approach to financing, we provide equity, senior debt, and basically everything in between. So we can also provide mezzanine financing to obviate the need for equity. We also can do corporate financings where that's appropriate, and we can mobilize funding, as I'll talk in a few minutes, from various concessional financing pots to which we also have access. These are just some basic criteria in terms of the way we deploy our capital. We're always a minority investor. We never invest typically more than 25% of the funds for the total project cost. But we have also an important role in mobilization. We have a so-called B-loan program where we provide our political risk umbrella over a transaction, act as the lender of record, and then other commercial banks and bilateral and multilateral entities can on-lend to the project through us. This is kind of a simple illustration of that, how the syndication works for a B loan, where we do a senior loan, a so-called A loan, and the B loan then is for the participant bank or banks. I now want to talk a bit more about some of these concessional funds to which we have access for obvious reasons. CSP is still a technology which is not least cost, and in order for it to be competitive in many of our countries of operation, it's going to require some kind of subsidization or concessional finance in order to bring it in line with other conventional energy sources. and other renewables that are becoming more competitive. So we are principally relying at the moment on something called the Clean Technology Fund, which was created by many of our shareholders in the year 2008. There's already been about $5 billion U.S. contributed to this. The U.S. government is one of the participants in terms of contributing to this, along with many leading European governments, including the governments of Germany, France, and others, and also the government of Japan. The terms are highly concessional, but they're generally loan concessional financing, not grant-based financing, which is important to bear in mind. We already have quite a long track record of doing things in concessional finance. As was mentioned in the intro, I served for 10 years as IFC's executive coordinator for the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, which was the first multi-donor trust fund providing support. GEF funds provided money for 2 ISCCS projects, Ain Beni Matar in Morocco and the Kuramat project in Egypt, both of which are fully operational today. This next slide just illustrates one of the concessional financing projects we've already deployed, a large wind project in Mexico involving some major companies, Electricité de France, the off-taker is Walmart de Mexico, where we already used funds from the Clean Technology Fund and blended them alongside IFC's regular funding. So this is not a theoretical possibility. This is already being done in multiple transactions. In terms of our basic strategy as an organization, we're investing in many different renewable energy technologies at scale and obviously trying to help the global deployment process continue to drive down the costs over time. In this process, as I mentioned, we're working with global and local players and working on both the upstream parts of the business as well as the downstream. In terms of our work across the solar power value chain, I'm just going to talk briefly now about some of the investments we've already made. We also have a group within IFC that's doing very early stage clean tech investments. This has to be focused on emerging markets specifically, so we're not going to fund, a U.S.-based or a European-based company to do research in Europe, but if there's some specific technology being deployed predominantly in emerging markets associated with CSP, for example, we can look at that as a possible investment. So in terms of the upstream part of the business, we've already made 2 investments in subsidiaries of Abengoa, one in Mexico, and this is the company that's providing the structural steel supports to the Solana and Mojave projects, and presumably also to the Palin project when that gets going, and a similar facility in India. We also have a history of financing companies in, for example, float glass, historically, who may still have some interest or involvement in CSP. And I now want to talk specifically about the investments we've already made within the last year. The first 2 CSP financings we've done were in South Africa, which, as you may know, has initiated in the last several years a very aggressive refit rebid program with feed-in tariffs for renewable energy. They're in the process of deploying the first units of the 600 megawatts that they've allocated to CSP. We're also involved in financing other kinds of renewables in South Africa. This program is clearly very interesting to people looking to expand CSP globally because it is a major economy with a very sophisticated banking and energy system, heavily coal-dominated, so basically everything that's being displaced off of Eskom's grid or in the power system planning will help reduce global greenhouse emissions. But there are some questions that have been raised as to whether the high cost of power being paid under the refit program is appropriate and or sustainable, and what will happen as future governments enter into the equation. So the feed-in tariff is allowing CSP products to be deployed at about 34 US cents a kilowatt hour. This is in some of the best areas of insulation in the country with also reliable water supply. South Africa is very interested in deepening its pool of baseload power assets, so there's a good fit in terms of CSP plus storage. And there's also the unique element of supporting black economic empowerment enterprises through this process. So there were 3 projects awarded during the first round of bidding, 200 megawatts in total, 150 megawatts to Abengoa Solar that we're involved in financing, and also a 50 megawatt trough project with Aqua Power. These are the 2 projects that we've been involved in financing, the 100 megawatt trough and a 50 megawatt tower, both of which are under construction at the moment. I don't need to dwell on the technologies, but there is storage associated with both projects. In terms of our role in the financing, we mobilized $145 million in our so-called senior A loans, as well as $224 million in B loans, and then concessional loan funds from the CTF. The justification for the CTF loan funding was that there are still technology risks, and this was really the first deployment of these projects outside of Europe in the case of sub-Saharan Africa. I'm now going to switch gears and talk a bit about what our colleagues at the World Bank have been doing in the Middle East and North Africa region. IFC has also been involved, but this has been an activity that's principally been led by our colleagues from the World Bank. This involves the so-called Middle East, North Africa, or MENA region CSP scale-up program. You can see the countries that are involved there. This is all based on the fact that you have a very large solar resource associated with unoccupied desert land in North Africa that's very proximate to Europe's loads. It's certainly a challenging time to try to execute this, both in terms of the political turmoil that's gone on in the region in the last several years, with which you're all no doubt familiar, as well as some of the changes that are going on within the European energy economy and some of the challenges that has created. There is a very strong policy framework evolving in the region. The best poster child for this is probably the creation of MASEN in Morocco that I'll talk some more about, but it's also going on simultaneously in other countries, including countries in the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, as well as some of the other North African countries. The EU's Renewable Energy Directive in 2009 actually allows physical imports of power from the MENA region, and there's already physical interconnection across the Straits of Gibraltar between Morocco and Spain, and there are plans to interconnect other parts of North Africa with Italy, for example, as well as strengthening the interconnections through the eastern part of the region through Turkey and up into the eastern, central, and eastern parts of Europe. There will be a need to deepen export markets over time because the domestic markets are not capable of supporting the higher tariffs that CSP will require in order to be bankable. And the real key question is whether and when the EU countries will open their markets to significant imports from CSP capacity or conventional renewable energy capacity constructed in the MENA region. So the MENA CSP investment plan is really designed to kind of jumpstart CSP project development across the region. It's roughly a $6 billion effort. The CTF has already earmarked $750 million in funds. As you note there, these are highly concessional funds, 40-year tenor, 10 years of grace. But there's still a need for about $1.4 billion in concessional finance that we have to mobilize on a project-by-project basis every time a new project is developed. So I think it's pretty clear we're trying to build on the regional and global momentum in the CSP field with potential projects in some of the more promising countries, as well as promoting new cross-border transmission infrastructure. And the first of these projects, which has received a lot of attention in the press, is the Ouarzazate 1 project in Morocco, which I'm now going to talk about, which has already received support from the trust fund of the Clean Technology Fund, as well as other concessional financiers. But there are other projects being developed in other countries, including Egypt, the West Bank, Jordan, and several others. So very quickly, Morocco created Massen as an outgrowth of its new Morocco solar plan, where they want to do 2 gigawatts of solar by 2020. This is about 10% of the EU's Mediterranean solar plan target, and Ouarzazate is the first major project of Massen, the Moroccan Solar Energy Agency, which was created to help spearhead this initiative. There's a phase 1 project out of 500 megawatts that they've announced of 160 megawatts with 3 hours of thermal storage. It was a competitive bidding process, a consortium led by Aqua Power with a bid of 19 cents a kilowatt hour won the bid, and the financing is being put in place now, and it's expected that construction, which was to start this year, will probably begin in the first quarter of 2014, with commissioning probably somewhere late 2015, 2016. I actually visited the site. A lot of the civil work and a pertinent infrastructure is already well along in construction. So things like the water reservoir, the transmission line, the substation are well underway even now, even though the Aqua Power Consortium has not begun the construction of the actual plant. It's a classic PPP structure. The gearing is looking at 70% debt and 30% equity, and the debt is coming from a whole series of international financial institutions, including the World Bank, African Development Bank, the European Investment Bank, Agence Française de Développement, KfW of Germany, the Neighborhood Investment Facility of the EU, and the CTF, with the CTF funds flowing both through the World Bank and the African Development Bank. So this is just a slide which synopsizes the bank group assistance to the project to date. Actually, IFC was involved in some advisory work on the first phase of Ouarzazate, and we may be involved also in the financing structure. Stay tuned for announcements on that front. So in summary, this is a high-risk project with potentially high rewards, but it's well underway, and it really, I think, will have a quite catalytic effect in terms of driving further developments in the region. The other major focus for countries in the region in terms of their support of CSP are the possible benefits, not just environmental, but also in terms of energy security and particularly the employment benefits. So the World Bank has done a number of studies of this topic by leading consulting firms. If you're interested, I can help direct you to some of those studies. There's one underway now specifically for Egypt, and we hope that the situation will settle down there to the point where some of the work on their next project will get back off the ground. These are some costs that have been put out in some of the recent studies by the bank. I suspect these are already a bit dated, so I won't really dwell on them. But the next step is really to look at standardizing design, streamlining processes for the next phase of Ouarzazate. Phase 2 has already been put out to pre-qualification. We're also looking at mobilizing new sources of financing, such as Global Green Climate Fund and green bonds and so-called green sukuk, which is Islamic finance instruments. We also want to try to make Mediterranean electricity markets a reality, and this is obviously a challenge. So there really are two interrelated challenges. One is implementing the policy and regulatory frameworks, and two is arranging suitable financing projects. And we foresee that concessional financing is going to remain essential for the viability of CSP projects over the next couple of decades. And we see that hopefully by 2020, we'll be up to about 1 gigawatt of CSP deployed in the region. By 2030, it'll be pushed up between 3 and 5 gigawatts, and beyond that, we'll just have to wait and see. I now want to talk about CSP in China, which is another program that our colleagues at the World Bank have been involved in. I think you may be familiar that most of the best areas of insulation in China are on the Tibetan Plateau. I think there's some speakers at this event who've been talking about Chinese projects. The Chinese government has also recently announced some fairly aggressive targets for deployment of CSP, 1 gigawatt by 2015 and 3 gigawatts by 2020, but they only have 1.5 megawatts in operation today. although there is a 50-megawatt project under construction and a large World Bank-supported pilot project planned in Ordos. So there are about 500 megawatts of projects in active development. The NDRC, who controls the development of the energy sector in China, is keen to see a scaling up of CSP deployment as well as supporting R&D and further adaptation of technology. This is a list of the CSP pipeline projects, and this is some more information on the proposed World Bank Datang Ordos project, which is being done in a joint venture with Datang, one of the 5 large daughter companies of the former state-owned enterprise China Power Corporation. So what's the objective of the World Bank Group? It's to demonstrate the technical viability of CSP deployment in a cold, dry, high latitude conditions in China and potentially for other comparable environments. These are some of the key technical specifications, estimated project cost, and that's a quick photo of the Ordos project site today. I think many of you probably follow through organizations like CSP Today, the ongoing deployment of CSP globally, that there's about 18 to 20 gigawatts of CSP in the pipeline. We may hear some more about that in other talks this morning. But we expect now cumulative installations, which have obviously passed 1.5 gigawatts, to go up to the range of 52 gigawatts by the next couple of decades, and to significantly expand market growth beyond the U.S. and Spanish markets where most of this growth has been concentrated. And we see emerging markets as a critical part of that. You may be familiar with India's CSP program, where 470 megawatts were awarded in the first round. Several of these projects are moving to completion. And there are also state-level solar programs providing, in some cases, R&D funding. There's also a Ministry of New and Renewable Energy Sources R&D program for new technological innovation. And there's a possibility of future bidding phases under the National Solar Mission, which have not yet been announced. We're also excited about what's happening in other countries in the MENA region, particularly the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which has announced a 25 gigawatt CSP program by KCARE, the King Abdullah City for Nuclear and Renewable Energy. We're awaiting further developments on that front, but it's expected that the first competitive bidding programs will be announced either later this year or very early next year. You probably have read and heard about the commissioning of the Ain Shams 100 megawatt trough project with Abengoa Solar and Total in the United Arab Emirates. The Sultanate of Oman is also planning a CSP program via tendering, and in Jordan, where we're very active, there's MOUs issued for a 50 megawatt trough project to a consortium that includes Mitsubishi, and a 25 megawatt tower project that was been awarded to Abengoa Solar. There are other exciting markets for CSP. In Chile, I'll just touch briefly on that. Corfo, the National Development Agency, has a tendering process for their first large-scale CSP project. As you may know, the bids are due, I think it's October 22nd, and there's concessional funding also coming from the CTF through the Inter-American Development Bank, KfW, and several other funding sources, including the Canadian government. Mexico has been looking at a pure steam solar thermal project at Agua Prieta for CFE, the national utility, and they're also continuing to study deployment of CSP, as is the governments of Turkey and several other governments. And I'll just close there to say that if you look globally across emerging markets, we see a very exciting picture of future CSP development. Thank you very much.